Welcome, y'all. Good morning. Thank you. Colin got way more of a welcome than that.
Good morning.
Morning,
man!
You should have said good morning, because when you say welcome, it's like...
I know. Good morning, guys. Happy Lord's Day. I'm so grateful y'all are here. I'm so grateful to be here.
Absolutely.
It's such a blessing to be in this building and to be able to brag and boast about our King here today. I just came out of this, got over this virus just yesterday. Had me laid up for 3 days. It was brutal. I pray none of you get, and I'm saying I'm contagious, but in your own way, get this virus. It was absolutely horrible. I don't even know what it was. They didn't even give me an answer. They kind of just sent me out the door. It's fine. I mean, that's for the last 3 years. I was hopeful they would just treat every virus like that. But there's only one that you gotta take extra precautions for. So mine wasn't that one. So we worked out well. Yeah, right. But I'm better. We're back. Well, I say that to say, typically I have a pretty good idea of the format of how far we're going to get this morning. Luckily, in chapter 12 of Matthew, it's kind of broken up into different chunks of this scene. This theme of the Sabbath and the Pharisees attempting to catch Jesus up on his failure to observe it correctly, I suppose. So we're going to take it one chunk at a time, chunk of scripture here at a time in chapter 12, and we'll see where we end up. As the Calvary way, and next week we'll pick up right wherever we did end up. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 12 for anybody who hasn't been here with us or wasn't here with us last week. So we're going to start in Matthew chapter 12. So, guys, down in South America, right between the countries of Argentina and Chile, there's this impressive statue that sits in between these two countries, and it's called Christ of the Andes. And it's right on the border, and at the time that the statue was placed there, it was meant to be a symbol of peace and friendship between these two countries. Right? And this was a very important symbol to be had because these two countries were on the verge of a war. It was simmering, and it could pop off at any moment. So they believed that as long as Christ was in between these two countries, that they were in good shape. That there was going to be an understanding of peace and security and love between these two countries, and war would not ensue. However, when the statue was erected, a very, very grave mistake was made, right? And it began to spark a whole nother beef between these two countries that began to simmer a pot that was even bigger than the one that was already cooking. You see, the beef kind of came from the Chilean side. So what happened was, from their perspective, from where their country stood, they were looking at the back of the statue of Jesus. And from the Argentinian side, they were looking at the front of Jesus with his arms out wide as though to embrace their country exclusively. As you can imagine, this situation was on the verge of escalating very quickly. These two South American countries were ready to take off until this one brilliant journalist had the idea to do something. He wrote an article in one of his editorials, and he was a Chilean journalist, and what he wrote was this, and the result of it was the perfect storm. It allowed the listeners to both laugh and I think to take a breath of ease. What he says is, writing to the Chileans, he says, well, isn't it it's obvious, isn't it? The statue was placed in such a way because the people of Argentina, they obviously need more looking after by Jesus than the great people of Chile, don't they? Everybody read this article, and they took a sigh of relief, right? And a potential war that was going to ensue between these two countries didn't happen. It's interesting how people will find a way to dispute over Jesus. Right, in this story we talk about here, it's a dispute over the statue of Jesus. But in this chapter we're about to read here in Matthew, we're going to see this dispute over, and throughout the entire gospel, over the person of Jesus. Right? It's a constant occurrence. Fears, opinions, anger, love. These are all just some of the feelings that are pulling people back and forth as they're introduced to Jesus and as he introduces his ministry into the world that we know. Some of the people were saying, could this really be the Messiah? Could it really be the one that all the prophets spoke about? Meanwhile, others were sensing the rope of control that was being pulled out of their hands without their permission. Right? As more and more people were following Jesus, as they were witnessing his miracles, as they were hearing his teaching, which was with more authority than the scribes could even offer them. These religious leaders became so desperate to try to paint Jesus as a criminal, as a blasphemer, that they were going and they were doing anything that they possibly could. They began to follow him around. They began to wait for him to do something, anything they could find that was wrong, so they could catch him up. Here in chapter 12, it really marks a point here in Matthew's gospel where these religious leaders are really going to amp up this effort, right? This agenda to try to catch Jesus up. They're really going to get escalated in their pursuit for him. And we know the end of the story here, don't we, Christians? Eventually, they will find something to arrest him on. And they will eventually trump up these charges, send him to a mock trial, and they'll eventually execute him, won't he? So, from this chapter 12 going forward, we're going to see these Pharisees are going to continually attempt to set up scenarios to catch Jesus into and set up a line of questioning that are going to try to catch Jesus up. But let's look. Let's break down this first section here in chapter 12. We'll read the first 8 verses, and then we'll unpack this. So in chapter 12, it says, verse 1, it says, "At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck the heads of grain to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, 'Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath.' But he said to them, 'Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.'" So, Jesus and his disciples, they're walking through this grain field, right? And it's the Sabbath, which means it's probably Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon. And they were hungry. So they were plucking the heads of grain. And this process that they were doing, they would pluck the heads of barley off of the stalks, and they would rub them together in their hands, right? And then when they rubbed them good and they could feel that they were being balled up, they would then blow the chaff out, and it would leave them with this gummed up kind of ball that they would pop into their mouth, and it was a tasty little snack for in ancient Israel. It was kind of the equivalent of chewing on sunflower seeds, right? It was that kind of a snack for them. So this kind of an activity, it was totally legal in the eyes of the law, of the act of taking the grain, right? Because even though it wasn't their field, it wasn't as though they were stealing. You know, the Lord had written a clause back into the law years ago that he made a provision for this kind of thing. It was back in Leviticus 23, where the Lord had told his people, he said that when you're harvesting your field, right, when you're going through, leave the outside edges, right? Leave the outside edges of the field. Also, once you've made one pass, man, don't go back and grab up what's left. Leave it. Don't do a second pass. You know, don't go back for what's there. What is there at that point, that is now for the Lord to offer to the stranger, to the fatherless, and to the poor. Right? He made provision for that demographic of people to be able to have access to something that they weren't in a position to be able to get for themselves. Now, it doesn't mean that category of people that it was open season, right? These guys had parameters to what they could do as well. You know, they couldn't come in there and harvest. They couldn't take advantage of. You couldn't go grab a crew with their friends and say, "All right, guys, we gotta hurry up, man. You know, this is a big field. We gotta get in there for everybody else. If we get all this, maybe we can sell it on the side." They couldn't do all that. It wasn't an option. You know, the Lord knew that. He saw ahead with his foreknowledge and his unbelievable understanding of who we are that he designed. He knew that eventually would become something. We would try to take advantage of it. So we put these stipulations in place. You could take what you could eat, what you needed, and move on. And the rest would be left for somebody else. And come the next day or the next year, whatever it was, there'd be another field, there'd be another grain of barley, there'd be another opportunity for you to get taken care of because the Lord your God knew that you were going to need that, right? This is the reality of it. And it was a reality for the farmers as well. It was an awesome provision he put in, a stipulation he put for the farmers, because you know what it did? It forced the farmers to recognize that they could trust the Lord. It allowed them an opportunity to recognize they could trust the Lord, that he would take care of them. That they didn't have to go back and gather up everything. You know, don't go back and grab everything I got. I got to take every last scrap and we're going to stock it away because, we got to take care of the Davises. That wasn't the mindset. You didn't have to operate that way. You knew you could leave it behind. You knew that you could leave the outside edges because you knew that the Lord was what you got was what the Lord gave you access to. That means that was exactly how much you needed. And if he told you to leave the rest behind, that means you didn't need the rest that was left behind. That's how it worked, and that was their mindset. That was their relationship with God. We see all throughout the law, and we'll see as if you study through Leviticus and Deuteronomy, I believe chapter 24 speaks on this again. You'll see that the Lord, there's a continual phrase or a continual category of people the Lord continues to mention, and it is the fatherless. Continues to mention the fatherless. And when you hear that, we consider in our life, we consider the welfare program, the welfare system that we have set up. This is very different than the welfare system that we have set up today. This is very, very different. Even though it sounds like it, this is very different. This is charity on a local level. Okay, this is very similar to the structure that our forefathers set in place when they first came to this country, right? Charity on a local level, which was typically managed, almost exclusively managed by the church. Why it was so different was because when charity is managed off of a local level from a church, you have a pastor, you have a congregation, you have men and women who are in a position to be able to be hands-on and to be able to assess a situation. They know who the traveler is. They know who the fathers are. They know who the poor are. They know who the drunk is and who the bum is and who those people who just want to take advantage of the system are, right? Unfortunately, as we've seen this federal welfare system put in place, it has separated itself from the local level to the state, to the federal level, and now the ones who are in charge, who are assessing the situation, are doing so through a review board, and they're so far removed that it's easy for someone to come in and take advantage and to just get provisions to allow them to continue their lifestyle. Now, I'm not standing up here for a moment assuming or suggesting that addictions, that disabilities, injuries, things of this nature cannot put somebody in a position where they need support. Of course they do. I've been there. Absolutely do. I've come out of prison and it's the only way I was to eat was because I was offered an opportunity to get involved in an EBT program. But there was absolutely a point when I could go back to work, and I chose not to because I had provisions in my pocket that were supplied by the state. So what happens when it's on a federal level? My point is, I don't want to get too far on that rabbit trail. This is different than that. We've kind of gone away from that. So the Lord puts in a provision. He allows us to recognize that he will take care of it. So the disciples, they were walking through this field and they got hungry and they decided they wanted to eat. And then these Pharisees popped out of nowhere, right? Because the one thing that they say they were doing wrong, they were eating it on the Sabbath, right? right? They weren't doing anything wrong as far as legally taking somebody else's grain, but they were eating on the Sabbath. Now the real question is, what were the Pharisees doing out in the middle of a grain field on a Saturday? What are they doing out there? They're hiding behind a tree waiting for Jesus. It's wild to consider what the scene must look like as Jesus and his disciples are walking through. But they're upset because they're eating on the Sabbath, right? And now the Sabbath, you guys are aware of what that is. The Lord committed to Moses on Mount Sinai, back in the book of Exodus, he committed him 10 commandments, right? Most of us even have come from a secular background. Maybe we're still, and he would say even in our secular background, we're all pretty familiar with a lot of them, right? Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. We've heard these our life. Thou shalt not steal. So, the fourth commandment, it says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. That's what the Lord said to Moses. Right? He said, the Lord your God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. And on the seventh day he rested. So I want you to also take that seventh day and I want you to rest. I gave you an example. I gave you a design. I would like for you to live that design out. Pretty simple, right? Oh yeah, it is, until man gets their hands on it and do exactly what man does and totally mess everything up, right? I mean, they've taken it to such a wild degree. The Jews had taken this one simple commandment, and they had actually comprised a book. The book, not even just this one commandment, all the commandments. They had comprised a book called the Mishnah. This book, the Mishnah, extended and expanded upon the laws of God and the commandments of God, and it had broken them down into these different chapters. Specifically for the Sabbath, I believe there's 24 chapters just talking about the do's and don'ts and what you can and can't do according to the Sabbath. And then you've got a book called the Talmud, which is a commentary on the Mishnah. So you've got the Mishnah that breaks up one simple commandment into 24 chapters, and then you've got the Talmud, which is a commentary on those 24 chapters. They keep stretching and stretching and stretching it. It was unbelievable. Even to this day, Orthodox Jews will observe this. They have things like you can't heal on the Sabbath, right? They have broken it down to the point where if you're a friend and you are walking, you're going for a hike, and he falls and he breaks his femur, it's poking out of his leg, you cannot on the Sabbath pour cold water on it. Because that's considered a form of healing. You have to allow that man to suffer until the next day, and then you can start the process of helping him because you can't heal on the Sabbath. Or you can't even use the microwave on the Sabbath because it's sending an electrical current, and that's considered carrying a burden. There's an elevator in New York. There may be other ones. It's called the Sabbat elevator. This Sabbat elevator is very specific. It's very unique. And you only want to take it on a Saturday and only if you're observing the Sabbath, because it's going to stop on every single floor of that building. Because it allows its passengers to be relieved of the obligation of pressing the button to stop them, because that would be sending an electrical current, and that would be carrying a burden, and that would be breaking the Sabbath. So it does the job for you and stops on every second. You better hope you're not going to the top floor. You're going to be there for a while. It is actually written in the Mishnah. This is written, documented by these men, that it is against the Sabbath to pick your nose on the Sabbath, because it is considered a form of harvesting. This is a true story. You can't make it up. They even have a clause in there that suggests that you run the risk of pulling hair back when you do it, which would be considered giving yourself a haircut, which is work, and that is then also against the Sabbath. It's unbelievable, right? And it's funny, but it's the reality of it. It's the reality of how far these Pharisees have gone, how far they have gone to make the people serve the Sabbath instead of the Sabbath to serve the people, right? That's all it was ever instituted to be. The Sabbath was made to serve the people. God knew how he designed us. He knew that he designed us to actually get more work done if we work 6 days and take that seventh day off. He knew that. He knew how we operate. So he said, guys, and I know how you operate as well, especially you men, you're going to take it to the max. You're going to go you're going to burn yourself out. You need to be told to chill out. Wives in the room know this. We need to be told to chill out sometimes. God said, I'm going to go ahead and get ahead of you, girls. I'm going to let them know nobody's going to work on the Sabbath. right? It was a day that allowed us to do exactly what Leviticus 23 did, and that was continually trust him, right? That even though I'm not working, even though I'm not doing all these things, even though I've got a whole honey-do list left to do, right, that I didn't get done, I trust that the Lord is going to provide everything that we need, because I'm going to sit back, I'm going to trust him, and I'm going to take this time to remember everything that he has done in my life to give me everything that I have. So if he gave me everything that I have, and he's supplying everything that I have, and he's providing everything that I have, then of course he's going to continue to protect everything that I have if I take a day off to consecrate myself to him, right? That's what the Sabbath was for. But they've taken it and they've made it this thing where it's supposed to be this lifestyle that nobody can ever possibly follow, and it's more of a burden than the burdens they're telling you not to do. So disciples are walking through this field, right? They're hungry, they're beginning to munch on some grain. It's no different than chewing on some popcorn, right? And then here come these legalists, right? They pop out of the bushes, and they're pointing the finger at them, you know? And they're attempting to charge them with harvesting grain on the Sabbath. You guys ever experienced something like this? You know, you guys ever experienced, maybe now, but for me, in my life before Christ, profiling, targeting? Mine was from law enforcement. Mine was from law enforcement and authorities. Man, they had it out for me. They would find ways. They would set me up. You know, some call it sting operations. You know, they wanted me bad. And I mean, us in the room who are redeemed, we can recognize the fact I brought every single bit of it on myself by the decisions that I was making. But at the time, it was cops and robbers, and they were out to get me, and they were the bad guys. But I know what it means to have them trying to get me, trying to look at me. They saw my car, and all of a sudden, they were following me, and they were... Or maybe it wasn't law enforcement, right? Maybe it was a teacher at college or in high school, right? You guys just got off on the wrong foot. You know, you rubbed them you said the wrong thing, they overheard it, now there's no coming back from it, right? No matter what you do, there's nothing you can do right. Or maybe it's that auntie, right, who is convinced that you are the sole reason that her sweet little Billy is going down the wrong road. And if she can prove that it's you, she can prove and exonerate him, right? So every Christmas, you know, auntie's trying to get you, man. She's looking around the corner. We've experienced it, right? That's what Jesus is going through right here. This is what him and his disciples are dealing with. These Pharisees, man, they're in the middle of the woods. They're in the middle of the field trying to catch him. It's wild. So, look at verse 3. We look at verse 3 and we see Jesus is going to respond to them. And when he responds to them, it is both reasonable and it's accurate. Jesus is he's going to cite the history and he's going to cite the law. He says, have you guys ever read what David did? You guys know these guys were really into David, right? I mean, he was the great king. He was a man after God's own heart. He was the chosen one, right? And the same David, on one occasion, he says, that same David, he went and he ate what by law was only supposed to be offered to the priests. Why? Because he was hungry. He said, because he was hungry. And he looks at he said, have you guys not read it? He knows that these guys have read it. He knows these guys have read it more than everybody else has read it, probably. He said, you guys remember David? He was running from Saul, him and his 400 men, right? Running from Saul. He's on the run from him. But the priests, they didn't know that. So he goes out to this middle of nowhere spot. These priests have no idea. They're off the grid. They haven't heard the news. Right? So they think he's still Saul's guy. And he says, hey man, we're starving. Can we get, he go, what do you know? He says, we're on a special mission for Saul. We're out here we're on king business. We need that bread. They said, all right, well, we got the showbread. So here you go. And he eats it. And he never met any condemnation from God. Not a bit of it does it tell us God condemned him for it. So the first thing that Jesus says is, you guys remember? You guys never read what David did? And what he's really saying is, you guys would have condemned David. You guys would have convicted him based on the measuring stick you're using right now, based on your assessment on what it means to follow and not follow. You guys would have convicted the greatest king that Israel has ever known. That's what he's telling these guys right now. And then he tells them in verse 5, he says, have you guys not noticed that God has the priests working on the Sabbath? He said they don't get a day off. They don't get in trouble for that either. You understand what you guys are saying? The Sabbath comes on the seventh day? The priests work every single day of the week, and they don't get in trouble for that. Tell me why that is. If everything is so black and white, there's another place in John, I think it's chapter 5. It's in the Gospel of John, where Jesus is having another argument with these Pharisees. And he says to them, okay, guys, and I love the Lord. Our Lord is he's so phenomenal when it comes to breaking these dudes down. I love that the Holy Spirit recorded it for us. It's most of it makes me laugh out loud. I don't know about you guys. But he says to them, he goes, so you guys want to talk to me about the Sabbath? It was chapter 5. It was right after he healed that guy had to pull the Bethesda. And they were saying he did it on the Sabbath, right? That was when they set out to kill him. And he says, tell me this. He goes, the Lord said to Abraham, long before he instituted the Sabbath, he told him you got to circumcise your baby on the 8th day. On the 8th day, you got to circumcise your child. I'm no mathematician, guys. But the rules of probability tell me that eventually one of those babies' circumcision date is going to land on the Sabbath. So what do you do then? He uses the law and the history to prove these guys wrong, and they got no response to it. What are you going to say to that? And he just walks. I guarantee. Doesn't tell us. I guarantee he just walks with mic drops and walks. Mic drops and walks. Listen, if this is the Lord and Savior that I know, he let me know when you're ready to answer that one. He's so cool, man. So the history and the law, this is what Jesus deals with them on first, right? He addresses them with this first. But now here in verse 6, watch, he's going to take it up a notch. Look what he says here in verse 6. He says, yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. All right, now this statement right here just grabbed everybody's attention. All right? This statement just grabbed everybody's attention because this temple that he's talking about, this is everything to these Jews. This temple is everything to these Jews. The thing is, what these guys didn't realize is that this temple, this house where they went to meet God, this represented something bigger, man. This temple represented something much, much bigger. This whole temple, this whole institute that they were all, they had their minds focused on. I mean, from Solomon's temple and all of his glory to the Babylonians ripping it down in that time of mourning that they had until Zerubbabel went back and got to rebuild it, right? And then Herod built it up even bigger, and now they're finally back in their temple. And he's telling them there's somebody here bigger than the temple because they don't realize this temple is all a picture of Jesus Christ. They don't get it. That God himself would come and live in a house, this house. My body, your body, he was going to come and dwell in that house. And what is our responsibility, right? This is our temple. Paul tells us that. Is to adorn it in gold and rubies and sapphires and all the precious jewels that we possibly can. We are to make this temple as beautiful and as reflective of our God as possible, because this is where he was going to come and live. He says, guys, there's somebody bigger than the temple is here with you right now. Bigger than the temple. And they didn't get it. They couldn't recognize it. So then Jesus goes on to tell them. He says, listen, guys, if you guys only knew that I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you wouldn't be running around trying to condemn people that have done nothing wrong. He said you wouldn't be going after the guiltless. You know, you wouldn't have condemned the guiltless. And then in verse 8, man, he's really going to drop the nuke on him on this one. He refers to himself as the Son of Man. Let me tell you, Son of Man is a messianic term. Every single Jew standing within an earshot understood exactly what was being said right now. There was no miscommunication. There was no, I'm not sure. No, it sounded kind of, no, they knew what he was saying. He says, I'm going to tell you something right now. The Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath. Oh, dude, these guys just took off. If there was one Pharisee, if there was any Pharisees in that group who were kind of on the fence about whether or not we got to get this guy, they didn't even need convincing after this. They were all in now, man. Their chips were in the middle at this point. This guy just took them to the mat. Let's consider for a second what Jesus just said. Right? He says, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. That means he's saying that he is Lord of rest. You guys ever found yourself in your life trying to earn right standing with God. Right? Trying to make up for all the bad that you did by doing all kinds of good, right? But no matter how much good you did, no matter how much effort you put in, you always fell short. It didn't matter. It didn't matter how much you do. And we can find ourselves trying to do the religious route, right? Convinced that if we just wear the right suit, if we just do enough charitable deeds, if we just do this and do that, whatever we think might earn us God's favor. And then somebody finally informs us, they finally tell us that none of that stuff is necessary. That we don't have to do any of that stuff, that God already loves you. That while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. God's already loves you. He loves you so much, and he wants to save you for free. He doesn't want nothing from you. He wants to save you for free. He just wants to respond to him. That's it. And you finally get to enjoy that rest. You finally get to experience that true relief. I promise you, Christian, that it is then and it is only then that you can truly understand and recognize and appreciate what Jesus is saying when he says that I am Lord of rest. I am the Lord of the Sabbath. We just talked about this last week, remember? Jesus says, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy burden, and I will give you rest. Come to me. It's the invitation. He's not saying bring everything you got and we'll tally it up and we'll see, maybe we'll put you together with another guy and you guys see. No, he didn't say any of that. Just show up. Just show up. You broken? You smoke? Life got you? It spit you out again? Get over here. That's all he's saying. And that is the true rest, right? But check this out. This is very important. If you weren't listening, check in. Christians that live in the New Testament, right? The Sabbath for us is no longer a day of rest. It's a lifestyle of rest. The Sabbath is not a day. The Sabbath is a way. You understand what I'm saying? A lifestyle where we can just fall back and relax into the arms of Jesus Christ. We just leave our life. We just leave our life. We leave all of our concerns, all of our worries right into his goodness. It's a way to live. It's the only way to live as a Christian. And if we choose to live our lives in any other way than, Lord, everything of my life, I'm talking my wife, my kids, my everything is yours. I trust you with it. If we're living any other way than that, we are living as lords of our lives. We're living as lords of our lives. And we need to do some work. We need to do some sanctification. We need to allow the Holy Spirit to examine us, to expose us. We need to allow him to give us the strength and the ability to get rid of it. Whether it's pride, whether it's shame, whether it's this, whether it's that, the Lord wants us to fall back into his arms and live a lifestyle of rest. He is Lord of rest. So let's keep going. Yeah, we got plenty of time. Let's read verse 9. So it says, now when he had departed from there, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man who had a withered hand. And they asked him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? That they might accuse him. And then he said to them, what man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Well, therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored as whole as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and plotted against him how they might destroy him. So the discussion out there in the field is around the Sabbath, and it indeed was the day of the Sabbath. So Jesus and his disciples, they make their way into town, and they go to this public town hall, known as the synagogue, that are in most of these towns. And we see that Jesus walks right into this setup, man. They've already got the stage set for him, and he walks right onto it. And there's this man. He's got a withered hand, right? His hand has suffered some form of atrophy. Either it lost its connection or it never had it at all. But it lost the connection through the nervous system into his brain. And over that period of time, over that process, it became useless. It became crippled. It became withered, right? So what do you do with something like that? If you had a deformity like that, what do you do with it? I mean, I'll tell you what, I would generally put it away. Right? It's not something that you put out there for everybody to see. It's not something that you put on display. It's embarrassing. Right? Especially in a Jewish culture, especially in a culture that believes wrongly, but they believe that anybody who has any kind of a disability, that they're cursed. And anybody who has a good life, who's doing well, they're blessed. They believe that everything that is visible was some sort of a reflection on God's either approval of your life or his disapproval of your life. Right? And it represented that you had sin in your life, and now it automatically allowed you to be profiled by your friends, your neighbors, and even your family. So what do you do when you're this guy, right? You have this hand is withered, it's causing the world to look at you in a way that it's your fault. Right? You keep it up your sleeve. You keep it put away. You hope that nobody notices that you have it, and if they already knew you had it, you hope they just forget. You know, you tuck that thing back. You don't greet people. You don't wave at people with your stubby, withered, clubbed hand. That's not what you do, right? Now it reminds me that there are some people probably in this room that are like me. And they've had or they have some withered hands. They can relate to this. Right? Some crippled or withered things that we just don't want to put on display. You ever notice, this is how it tends to be whenever you first meet somebody in our culture, you know? Whether it be a friendship, a first date, a job interview, right? We always keep our withered hand covered up, right? Until we believe that the other party can handle it. Because we don't want to scare them away. We always show our best face forward. Nobody sees my withered hand until I know you're not going anywhere. And then, all right, we'll peek it out finger by finger. You know? In this world that we live in this generation today, in this world of social media, man, it's allowed a platform for people to appear as though nobody has any withered hands at all. Right? As though there's nobody amongst, none of our peers suffer from any type of a disability or any type of a withered hand. It's such a dangerous thing, man. It sets such a precedence for a false sense of expectation that's so similar to this Jewish culture that they're living in. This expectation that you're supposed to be perfect or else you're cursed. It can be so damaging for young people, man, to be convinced that they're the only ones that have these problems, that they're the only ones that have these withered hands. You know, that everybody else's life is absolutely perfect. What they don't account for is the fact that it's easy to display a perfect life when you're choosing from 100 videos and 100 pictures, and you choose the best one so that you can then paint the perfect narrative, right? But we don't see that. And it's so easy for young people, especially young girls, to believe that they have to hide their withered hands at all costs. At all costs. It is life-threatening to some young people to allow their withered hands to be exposed to the public around them, because they will be bashed and they will be belittled and they will be cursed or considered cursed by everybody around them. So these religious leaders, man, they ask, because of course this is a setup. I mean, he's walked right into it. They already got the guy ready. He's already there in the synagogue. The religious leaders are there waiting for this opportunity. So they say, okay, you had an answer for us while your disciples were eating the food out in the field during the Sabbath. Tell us this. Since it's okay to eat on the Sabbath, and you made a decent case, you know, with the David thing, and is it okay to heal on the Sabbath? So our Lord answers them again, right? And again, he answers them reasonably. Again, he gives them a reasonable answer. He goes, okay, well, tell me this. I mean, if you guys had one sheep, if you only had one sheep and that sheep ran off and it fell into a pit, would you go get it? Would you go, even though it's a Sabbath, would you go down and would you grab your sheep out and would you save him? You would, right? All right, you would. So tell me this. You're telling me that you wouldn't I can't do the same for a man? A man is more valuable than a sheep. Of course I can go. That's your answer right there. Now, this is something that This is an unfortunate thing about our culture that needs to get addressed. Because for most of us in the room, we have grown up or at least been exposed to at some certain level the public school systems. The public school systems which would teach us and educate us, our friends, maybe our children, that human beings are actually nothing more than animals. They're actually quite similar to animals to the degree where we evolved from animals. Right? It convinces human beings that we came from nothing, we're headed to nothing, and in the process we all just kind of emerged out of animals, in which case we are of equal value than animals. This all got introduced in mid-1860s by Charlie Darwin's crazy logic, which somehow grabbed on and became state religion. It became the doctrine. It became the standard that every other truth had to orbit around. And in the event that any other truth did not correlate with this doctrine, it was censored and shut out. Starting with the church. We saw it in the 60s where it was completely pushed out of the school systems. You could no longer have a Bible or prayer in church because it did not orbit around the idea of evolution, this state-run religion, where we are now taking human beings and devaluing them to the point where we are looking at each other in an animalistic way. It allowed for a decade later to open the door for the mass genocide of unborn children over the last 50 years. We're looking at the same animalistic mindset that is pushing an agenda right now in our state by our governor, where she is attempting to open the door for late-term abortion. She wants to open the door. She wants to make it legal to be able to kill your unborn child up until the day you deliver. Guys, I had the blessing of watching both of my boys come into this earth. Man, I get to hold them moments after their first breaths on their own. I got to hold them in my arms. I got to look at their little wrinkly fingers and toes, and they're crying, and they look like a 90-year-old man looking back at me. It was so wild, both times, equally and differently, in the same crazy, beautiful way. Right? The most... I looked at Miranda, she's losing, I'm losing it. You know, we're just thanking the Lord together for this blessing He just gave us. And then He gave it to us again. This world, Satan has done such a good job of conditioning the mindset of the world that we live in today, that we are no better, no more valuable, no greater creature than an animal. That we are now considering the murder of children and the difference between the day that I'm holding my baby in my arms to the day before, the same way that I would consider whether or not I could shoot a white-tailed buck, whether it's November or it's December. Is it in season or out of season? That's the question we're asking at this point. Is that baby in season? Oh, you're good. It's what happens when we start to devalue life and we start to forget that we are made in the image of God. We are made body, soul, and spirit. We are made in the image of the Trinity. Animals were made for us and for the Lord. He gave us dominion over them. They are conditioning a world that has devalued human beings to the point where we are allowing, and people are in the streets and they're fighting and they feel justified and they feel like they are the champions because they're fighting for women's rights. Healthcare, they call it. We got to move on. So, we do the same thing with property. We do a similar thing with property. We will go after a job, money, a vehicle, a house, a position. And we can find ourselves, can't we, overlooking human needs. We can find ourselves stepping over human lives. We can find ourselves actually hurting other humans in the attempt to get there. We can get so lost in give me mine, give me mine, give me mine. And it brings us back to Leviticus 23 when the Lord said, you don't need to do that because I gave it to you in the first place. I'm going to take care of you through the entire thing. And there's no reason to get caught up on the material things because I'm the Lord I created it all. I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. Rest back into me. But we get caught up, we watch the world getting caught up in that, and it's all a result of having this devaluation of human life, where we assume that a car and a position and a new house out in the suburbs is of more importance than that person who, whatever the story is, has left that human life in suffering. And we're not willing to do anything to help them because we're too focused, driven, and our mindset is locked in on what we need. And it's all a condition. The world is conditioning people to believe this way and to see this way. And the Lord is trying to bring it back. He says, is man of not more value than sheep? You're telling me that if your car was getting towed, if your property was getting seized, if these things were happening, you wouldn't go handle it? But you see a human being that he's dying in the street, and you won't do a thing? Is man not more valuable than sheep? That's what he's trying to say right here. So, he says to the guy, he says, stretch out your hand. Man, this, verse 13. Verse 13, he says, then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out. And it was restored, as whole as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and plotted against him, how they might destroy him. So he finishes these Pharisees off. He puts them in their place. They had nothing more to say. How do you respond to that? You don't, right? You don't respond to the Lord. With anything, you run away if you're in an argument with him. We watch it so many times. So he puts these guys in their place, and then he tells the man to do something, right? He tells him to do something that no doubt this guy didn't want to do. This guy didn't want. This was probably the last thing that this dude wanted to hear. Jesus says, stretch out your hand. A couple things about this, right? Number one, he's asking this guy to expose his defect. He's asking this guy to expose his defect. He tells him to stretch out his withered hand. He says, stretch out your claw, dude. You know what I mean? Stretch out that brokenness that you've been tucking away. I see it. It's not a typical request. It was probably the most horrifying thing that this guy could have ever heard in a public synagogue, in a public town hall, that he could possibly ever consider. But you guys see, the Lord is inviting him to expose his biggest issue so that everybody can see what God wanted to do with that thing. He wanted him to put it on display so that everybody got a front row seat to what God could do to the worst possible situation in this man's life. I think he's calling, and he wants to do, guys, a similar work in every single one of our lives. If we'll just get honest with our weakness and our humanness, right, that we all come through the door with, about those things that we need to change, and we'll just lay them down. And we'll allow the Lord to do that work in those areas. Listen, we've all got them. This isn't social media. This ain't social media. We've all got withered hands. We've either got withered hands or we've had them. Right? We're all being sanctified every single day, and as the Holy Spirit is faithful to continue to expose and to guide us through this process where we can give them up to Him and give them up to be removed from our lives, man. These are some things that need to change. You know, there's two types of sin. There's two types of sin. There's overt sin and there's covert sin. Now, overt sin can be pretty simple to identify, right? Pretty simple to address the overt sin in our lives. And if you can't address it, just ask a loved one or your wife. I'm sure she'll be happy to let you know exactly what those overt sins are. Addiction, gambling too much, right? Anger issues, pride, drinking. I mean, the list goes on, right? We've all come to the cross with them. Every single one of us. We probably dare to say, I know I'll speak for myself, I got plenty of them still. Plenty of them still. They're those sins that are out in the open. Everybody can see them. They're exposed. They're on display for the world. But then you got the covert sins, right? those ones can get a little bit more tricky. These are the sins that are hidden away pretty good. And in the event that we're aware of these sins, probability is that we've probably done a lot of work ourselves to make sure that we've tucked them back even farther than maybe they were before. Right? It might be that computer that we do all through all that trouble to make sure nobody can gain access to, right? It might be that friendship on social media that we know we shouldn't be following that individual. It might be that too long of a stare with that girl at the gym in the morning that is not your wife, right? These overt sins that nobody but you and your Lord know are happening. The Lord is saying to expose that nasty, withered, grotesque hand that you've been keeping tucked back, right? That one that you've been hiding from everybody your whole life. And he says, watch what I want to do with it. Stretch out that hand. The second thing that he's saying to this guy, he's saying this: the man hears the Lord call him to do something that he has never before in his life been able to do. He's never been able to do this. It's absolutely impossible. And isn't this our God? It's the same way that he told the crippled man to stand up and walk. Take up your bed and walk. That man he's never been able to walk. He can't walk. He knows he can't walk. And God says, do it. He tells this man, stretch out your hand. He tells people to do this kind of stuff because our Lord Jesus loves to target the one thing that should seem absolutely impossible. That thing that all the evidence in your life has supported and proven that it is not an option. He asks them to do it right there in front of everybody. That's what he's doing with this guy. And listen, this guy's reaction could have been much different than what we read here, right? We get the abridged version, kind of, I suppose. He just he tells him stretch out the hand, he stretches it out. That's awesome. I wish it was like that in my life. God tells me to stretch out my hand. I'm like, I don't know. Years later, we readdress it. All right. I know you asked me, back in 2008. I mean, still. This guy's awesome. This guy just. But it could have been like me, right? Could have been like, oh yeah. That's real funny. Stretch out my hand. You don't think I like to stretch this hand out? You don't think I've tried? You know how many years I've tried to stretch out this hand? Every morning I try to stretch out this hand. It doesn't work. There's no connection, Lord. It doesn't do nothing. They can't stretch out this hand. And then Jesus looks at him and he says, hey, I know, you've tried. I know you have. I know you've done everything you could possibly do to stretch out that hand. I have no doubt. I watched it. But I'm asking you to just trust me. I'm asking you to just trust me and just do what I say. Man, do this for me. Try one more time. Try right here one more time. And this man, he says, all right. And he exposes it. He takes his hand out of the shirt sleeve that he had it tucked up in. And he stretches out his hand. And it's healed. What does it say? It says it was restored as whole as the other one. No difference. It was like there was nothing ever wrong with it. He says, I get it. You've gone through every single process you could possibly think of. Dude, I know. One more time. One more time. And watch what I do. Guys, I think likewise there are some things in our lives that got to be offered up to the Lord in faith. Very well it may be like this man here, man. Where all the evidence in the world has proven that it can't happen. All the evidence in the world. This guy didn't need any more convincing. He lived in this condition for a long time. He'd already made all the attempts. He'd already experienced all the failures. Nobody knew better than this man that this hand was dead. Nobody knew better. But aren't those the areas that God loves to work in the most? Right? Because when he does that miracle, when God does that thing, when he restores that hand as whole as the other one, man, nobody on planet Earth, including you, nobody more than you, can give the contribution and the glory and the magnification to anybody but him. When it's in that marriage, right? When it's in that addiction, when it's in that relationship, that diagnosis. When God says, I know you believe this thing is lost, man. I know that you've all been given up and you're justified for it. All those people that you know have already died from this disease. All those marriages have failed once they've gotten to this point. Nobody's ever recovered from bankruptcy at this age. They're dropping like flies out there by that disease. I know, I get it. But listen to what I'm saying. Just trust me. Stretch that thing out to me. And watch what I can do with it. That's as far as we're going to get this morning. Erica, could you go grab Miranda for me? You guys doing another song? Would you grab Miranda for me? All right, guys, as the band comes back up here, let's pray.